Hey folks, welcome back to the Church Reset read-through. We're on to part 3 this week. Getting into chapter 2, it'll probably take us a couple weeks to get through chapter 2. It's a bit of a longer one. And this is the first week where I'm going to start disagreeing with myself a little bit. Again, as I said in the first episode, this is 5 years on since I wrote this book. Even further back, honestly, it's 5 years since I published it, which means 5.5, even up to 6 for some of the text itself. And so your mind does change on things. Not major things, not I was dead wrong or anything like that, but as far as approaches, as far as practical application and writing these things and thinking through them and then living them out, seeing that, okay, maybe I had that wrong a little bit. And so hopefully that is of interest to you here in this week's read-through. As always, if you're watching this on YouTube, please click like on the video. It doesn't cost you anything to hit that and help us out there. And make sure you're subscribed to the Focus Press channel. And then, as always, the Church Reset podcast feed. The best place to keep up with everything I do. Articles and audio from things like this and wherever else you're catching it. So I know some of you were listening to it there already. I appreciate that. If you are one of the podcast subscribers, please leave a rating on there on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you are. That is greatly appreciated as well. All right, let's go ahead and get into the text for this week. Once again, it's chapter 2 of Church Reset. As always, available on Amazon and on focuspress.org. If you'd like to pick up a copy, be sure to check that out. Chapter 2, Going Out of Business. In the beginning, the church was a fellowship of men and women centering on the living Christ. Then the church moved to Greece, where it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, where it became an institution. Next, it moved to Europe, where it became a culture, and finally it moved to America, where it became an enterprise. Unknown origin. The challenge at the very heart of writing a book on resetting the modern church is this. How do I decide to whom I'm writing? Is it for church leaders or for church members? For people who have a vested interest in running the church or for church attendees? That such a distinction exists is not merely one of a number of areas that must be addressed. No, it's the symptom that tells us exactly why church isn't more. We're well familiar with the problem of church meaning either the building or the event, seen in phrases like, I have to stop by the church, or I can't go tomorrow, I have church. But there's a third sense in which church is often used, one which receives far less scrutiny. In most cases today, churches exist organizationally, like a business. The church is having a gospel meeting next week. The church has a food pantry for the homeless. We speak about churches much the same way we speak about gyms, libraries, or even restaurants. Since it's a business, the people involved fall into one of two categories. Some folks are on that provider side of the counter, deciding what the church will look like. The pressure is placed on elders and ministers to put on the kind of worship, sermons, programs, and activities that will make people want to choose our church and get more and more involved once they join us. There's a multi-million-dollar industry built around helping churches know how to get this just right. What to put on the sign, how to use your building to your advantage, how long the sermon should be, how many songs to include and what type of songs they should be, what to train your greeters to say, what programs will bring people in, etc. The rest are on the other side of the counter, the customer side, choosing which church they attend based on various criteria and choosing the level of involvement with which they're comfortable. They are all individuals who have their own walk with God, looking for the place that will help them, and possibly their family, strengthen that walk with God so they can go to heaven. The leadership's hope is that they develop enough of a brand loyalty among people that they will stay and get involved. Some of them may even stay around long enough and get involved enough to migrate to the provider side of the counter. There's a sense of we are here to help you. But who is the we? And who is the you? Don't the you have a responsibility to the we? And is it biblical to have that split? Such a distinction is not biblical in any sense whatsoever. Though we generally use church to mean either the building, the event, or the organization, the Bible never uses the word in any of these senses. The church is a family, a temple made up of living stones, a body held together by what every joint supplies. Business-like churches are based on precisely the opposite idea, and it shows in a number of ways. All right, before we get into those ways, again, agree some, disagree some with my previous self here. The stuff where it is about consumer Christianity, as the book will go on to discuss, I think that's still very much valid, that the idea of we're putting on the kind of church that you want to come be a part of, yeah, that mindset is wrong, but the idea of the we of church. It's kind of like, the human body. What things can it do without? What am I? Am I my brain? Am I my heart? Am I my consciousness? Am I my soul? And all of those questions that you have. Well, the same thing of the church. If certain people, if all of the leadership leave, everybody that does the preaching, teaching, everyone's capable of those things leave, you might still have a church, but things are going to be drastically different. It's going to be a different thing. Whereas some people do come and go, unfortunately, and not as much change. And so there's that side of it. But the other side of it is where my thinking has changed on this is the word that Paul uses a lot, or at least a number of times with Timothy and Titus, entrusted. He was entrusted with the gospel. He entrusted Timothy with the gospel. He entrusted Titus with it. They had been entrusted, and that was not just something that everybody got. That was not something for everybody. It was a specific thing, and he tells Timothy, as a verse I'll look at later in the book, in 2 Timothy 2:2, things you heard from me, find faithful men, teach them so that they can teach others. The faithful men is there are certain people, and so that entrusted people are there people who are given protection of the gospel. The elders are given protection of the church. The elders are given the shepherding, nourishing role over the church. And again, all those things you see in Timothy and Titus, they were not given to everybody. Even when you look at Ephesians 4, it ends with what every joint supplies, but it starts with some are given as apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, all of those different roles, some of which we don't have, some of which we do. But there are people placed in those positions to affect certain things, to equip everybody else to do the work, but there is a split there. There is the equippers and the equipped, and you will have a point at which some of the equipped will become equippers themselves, but there's this idea, and the book will go on to talk about this as well, that disciple makers or disciples make disciples, but then people have taken that to disciples make disciple makers. And so you train somebody up to go find other people, evangelize them, teach them the Bible, things like that. I don't think that's possible. Well, in fact, it's from experience. I know that there's just certain people who are not equipped for that, and it's not fair to them, I guess, to expect that of them. And so when we look at these kinds of things, no, we don't want to have the people on the other side of the counter. It's not this business-like restaurant kind of thing where you just come in and consume. That part is a fair critique, but even at the potluck, you've got people making the main dishes and people bringing the sides, that kind of thing. You've got the people coordinating it and saying what everybody needs to bring. In the family dinner, the parents, when you've got your big family Thanksgiving, mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, whoever it is that's hosting it, usually decides on what it's going to be. Well, some people have been entrusted with those governing, direction deciding parts of the church. And so you'll hear it said that the church is not an organization, it's an organism. It's both of those things. It's not a business, but it is an institution. It is a body that is led by certain men that God has appointed through certain means and the qualifications he's given. And we need to respect and honor that, but again, not lose but they're not providers for a group of consumers thing that it's become today. So I still think the heart of the critique is right, but that distinction needs to be maintained, because what ends up happening is we kind of do the democracy. Well, we're all leaders of the church. And we're not, because we're not all going to give an account, and that's the most important part there. All right, continuing on. Business-like churches are reliant on paid staff. This isn't an anti-paid staff point, as Paul laid out plainly that paying full-time ministry workers is good and acceptable, 1 Corinthians 9:14. Seeing as I'm currently somebody who works in a paid ministry job, please don't misconstrue this point as being anti-paid ministry. However, talk to any minister and you'll find we've almost all had that's the preacher's job experience. In many congregations, if somebody wasn't being paid to evangelize, visit the sick, call on the absent, and reach out to visitors, some of those things simply wouldn't happen. As I was hitting a bit of a writer's block looking for ways to articulate this point, I found myself on Facebook. How do we always end up there? Right at the top of my feed, I stumbled across the perfect illustration for this point. It came in the form of a humorous video of a man doing one of those TV show obstacle courses, with the twist being that they had added labels to each of the obstacles depicting different ministry challenges and expectations. A sampling of some of the labels: visionary leadership, people leaving the church, angry old lady mad about the song service, building projects, people treating me weird because I'm a minister, making time for my family, no private life, glass house effect. Though their intended message was something along the lines of ministry is hard but God gets us through it, they inadvertently made this point for me better than I ever could. The minister is expected to grow the church numerically, help coordinate improvements to the building, and respond to and appease all of the complaints from the customers so they won't leave. At the same time, there is the awkward position of being a part of a church family, but a hired part, leading to him and his family being treated differently and friendships that are often tenuous at best. The business-like church almost asks for this kind of attitude, though. It excuses people from fulfilling a number of their commanded biblical duties with the excuse that they're all very busy and the minister just has more time for it. And unfortunately, ministers can further the problem too. It's easy to have the attitude of I have the education, the training, and the experience, and become selfish with the pulpit or assume that people can't handle deep theological teaching. It's also easy to elevate our work as being the biggest factor of a church's success. You don't have to look far to see quotes like, "The best way to revive a church is to build a fire in the pulpit," allegedly by D.L. Moody. And it's incredibly easy to have that attitude, the attitude that little should be expected of the members. That's why you'll hear quotes like these from time to time. Most people have had a hard week. Take it easy on them from the pulpit. People are busy. We can't expect them to give more than 2 hours per week to the church. There's a level of pride involved when we expect so little of the people in the pews. We're essentially saying, it's not fair to expect everyone to be as interested in God as I am. How easily we forget that it isn't our talents, knowledge, or personality that make the church go. As we'll see later, the scriptures present the church as the spiritual equivalent of a potluck meal, with everyone being tasked to provide for each other. From both sides of the counter, the prevailing model of church today puts far too much emphasis on the staff, turning us into a restaurant rather than a potluck. I think there's a lot of agreement from folks that I hear from that the preacher model is broken. There's kind of the pastor model, the one-man band, I believe as LaGard Smith put it, that really everything falls on his shoulders. There is kind of the workhorse thing of, yeah, he'll just handle everything, and that one is less than the one-man band pastor model because he doesn't even have the authority. It's just we'll delegate all the tasks to him, but not let him make any decisions, which is really, really frustrating, really hard to deal with. There's the he only works on 1 day a week kind of jokes that come up, and so there's all kinds of different views of what the preacher is supposed to be. There are some that don't believe the preacher should be a paid role. There's some that believe it should be done by everybody. I don't think that's what the scriptures teach us. When it says, "Let not many of you become teachers," it's not a great idea to make everybody a teacher. On the other hand, we've got to figure out what the preacher is supposed to do, and this idea that they are the providers in this consumer provider model, that they're kind of the chef of the restaurant, or they're the wait staff, or they're whatever part of that analogy you want to take for them, that doesn't work. It's the kind of thing that I think a lot of guys are quitting the pulpit because this has been so messed up, so misunderstood as to what the preacher is supposed to be. And so blurring the lines to where he's just one of the guys, that's probably not ever going to happen. When you read Paul talking to Timothy and Titus, that's not how he's expecting them to operate, and so that's important for us to note. On the other hand, we need to figure out how to train them, or how to put preachers in the best situation to succeed in being equippers. That you are getting the rest of the plate spinning. You're getting people doing their jobs, because again, if he's the only one evangelizing, that's not going to work. If he's the only one making visits or being hospitable or whatever, it's not going to work. It's his job to get other people doing it, and maybe we need to focus more on that. And I think this next point feeds into that as well. Business-like churches are reliant on lectures. About 3 years into my first ministry work, I attended a conference for preachers. It was one I had attended before, and I benefited greatly from it each time. But this particular occasion was different. At the time, I was going through a lot in my ministry, facing a number of personal challenges and difficulties within the church. As much as I learned from the lessons, I kept finding myself thinking I'd trade all of the conferences and lectures in the world just to sit and talk to an older minister and pick his brain about my problems. I had so many questions that I just couldn't answer in my inexperience, and I needed somebody who could answer them. That's nothing against the good, talented brothers who were speaking at the conference. It's just an inescapable fact that a message preached to a room of people can't address the questions and struggles of each individual listener. As I lamented my lack of place to turn to really connect those lessons to my life, it hit me. As a preacher, this is the challenge the members who hear my sermons face every week. Yes, people can go through sermons and Bible classes, but one-size-fits-all instruction couldn't possibly ever reach every person where they are, teach them at their level, address any questions they have, and give them practical ways to apply it in their walk. Briefly, this is one of my big issues with lectureships. We pour so much money and time and planning and efforts into premium preaching. Let's get the best guys together. We'll get them to preach, and it's great. There's, again, a lot of good preachers. There's a lot of guys who know their stuff, and all of those elements. I understand that. But what people really need, in fact, I just saw a great post about this today. It was a woman saying if the older women in churches did the Titus 2 duties, we wouldn't need ladies' days and ladies' conferences. Like, you're supposed to have that close to home. We don't have it close to home, and so we think it's got to be done on this broad scale, one time, one shot, one weekend get together kind of thing. That's not going to get it done, and that is kind of the broad scale version of the consumer provider thing of church. Of we'll just put the talented chefs up there and they'll feed you the best meal, and it's like it might be the best meal, but I have to eat again tomorrow when I go home and the chef's not there anymore. So a bit of an aside on the lectureship thing, but I think it is a very clear extension from what we think of the local preacher done kind of in a bigger regional or national sense. The solution for me was the same solution we must offer everybody else. I went home from that conference and prayed that God would place a mentor in my life, somebody I could ask about these difficulties, and who could share experienced biblical advice. Of course, that's exactly what he did. A brother who preached at a congregation a few minutes down the road took me under his wing, and I'm not sure where I would have been without him. That kind of mentorship and guidance was what I needed to grow and serve God. There was no other way to get knowledge that was specific to my particular difficulties. I don't think it's a stretch to say that that's what every Christian needs in their walk with God, yet most of them will rarely have such a relationship, if ever. Beyond that, it takes years and years of sermons and Bible classes to give people even an elementary education in the Scriptures. This is because there's just not enough time, and because listening to lectures with little to no interaction is literally the worst way to learn for retention. And yet we keep feeding them sermons and Bible classes and wondering why they aren't growing, why we aren't evangelizing, why they persist in the same sins and misunderstandings year after year. In both Pagan Christianity by Frank Viola and George Barna, and Total Church by Tim Chester and Steve Timmis, the argument is made that the singular monologue version of sermon we have today looks nothing like what the original church relied on for their teaching. Both books make the argument that the way we do preaching today is actually a result of Constantine's secularization of the church, where Roman citizens were encouraged and even pressured by the Roman government to join the Christian church. At that point, churches adapted their practice. Rather than being an interconnected family, they had people among them they knew they wouldn't see throughout the week, so they loaded up their teaching into one message to try and get them all the learning they needed. We're stuck with their compromising, far less effective formula to this day. I'm not entirely sure how accurate that is. I think Constantine is sometimes given a bit too much of a bad rap, but the idea that kind of the preaching to the visitor thing, or just kind of a least common denominator sermon, wherever that came from, it's still pervasive today, and it's a really big problem when it comes to bringing people to maturity, to keeping them from being consumers, and equipping them for the work. We have to get it out of our minds that that's going to happen if we just got the best 30-minute sermon, the best speaker, and he puts his best prep time in and really hits them between the eyes with that 30 minutes. Nobody learns that way. Nobody grows that way. It's a very slow path to growth. If you do it one time a week. And again, in an impersonal sense. We have to wake up to the lessons all these centuries have taught us. There's just no way that sermons and Bible classes can be personalized enough to give all of the correction, encouragement, and instruction each needs. And there's no way they can cover all the topics people need to know. And there's no way people can retain enough to be meaningfully molded into Christ-likeness from such small spiritual meals. And yet that's the diet the average Christian receives as part of their church life. In short, we typically expect way, way too much to come from sermons and classes. The first time I made this point, it did not go over well with my preacher friends. It's true. Nobody's going to come to maturity. Nobody's going to grow, like in a physical, to make the analogy, in a human physical sense, if you fed them one time a week. It doesn't work that way. The business-like approach to church creates customers who can only give a few hours per week and who can only consume, which places the onus on the providers to keep serving up these spiritual meals for the customers. Customers then choose the church where the preaching and teaching best meet their needs and the style they prefer. This is interesting. It gets into what I call choose-your-own-adventure Christianity of, if you really want to be invested in more, you can go get more. It might be podcasts, it might be YouTube, it might be different teachers, books, whatever else. There's a million resources, and so those that want to grow in Christ more might go to that because their church isn't giving it to them. Others I know have been pulled towards Catholicism or other churches that kind of have the daily mass and opportunities where you can go and speak to the priest, office hours, whatever it may be, so that they can have that kind of one-on-one or that follow-up or that extra teaching, because it's like, feed me, the baby food. I need it broken down and cut up into small pieces for me, and because I need the word, but I don't know what to do with it. And we kind of tell people, well, go find something to supplement if you feel like you're not getting nourished enough. It's only relationally that this is going to happen. Carrying on, business-like churches are reliant on marketing. What steps would you need to take if you wanted to open a restaurant? Aside from all the paperwork and red tape, the list includes things like finding a location, putting out signage so people know you're there, advertising your menu items, offering special deals and coupons, and ultimately providing the kind of food and environment that would make people want to come back. How do churches reach people today? The list includes finding and/or developing a location for a building, putting up a sign with the website and times, advertising what kind of church you are, experiential, Bible teaching, family-oriented, etc., offering special events, and ultimately providing the kind of worship, preaching, and environment that would make people want to come back. We try to get them in the door, and once they come in, we want them to like our singing, our preacher sermons, our youth group, our building, etc. Essentially, we're selling ourselves to customers. The more people we have in a congregation who came in under those terms, the greater the provider-consumer divide in the church grows. And what is the centerpiece of church marketing? The program. This one's pretty straightforward. I think the point just carries, and somebody might push back on it or disagree. I think it's pretty hard to argue that we start a church, try to grow a church the same way that any business would, any restaurant in your town would. And that's not evangelism of getting people to hopefully enjoy the experience while they're around. That's not making it about Jesus. It's about us and what we provide. And so many times because of that, because we're trying to reach people and get numbers in the door, that's where compromise comes in, because the number is the ultimate thing. And it's not about him anymore. It's about our marketing abilities. And you really see this in the community church world, painting with a broad brush there, but there is a lot of that happens where you can't even really tell what doctrine they hold, because that's not important. What's important is creating the feeling that gets people in the door. And so that's an issue in itself. Continuing. Business-like churches are reliant on programs. Just like the restaurant that rises or falls based on what they offer on the menu, so churches today have come to rise or fall based on what they offer on their menu of activities and programs. I don't know how many people have told me that in order for our church family to grow, we're going to need families with kids so we can have a children's or youth program. I'm obviously not averse to having families with young children attending our congregation, but where on earth do we get the idea that a church is dead unless they can offer people a good youth program? Certainly not from the Bible. More and more, though, small churches continue to be held down and passed over, while the larger churches add more and more programs to segment their congregation, all the more so that every demographic has a catered experience. Children's ministry, youth ministry, college ministry, singles young professional ministry, young families ministry, divorce ministry, seniors ministry. I once heard a preacher from one of these large congregations speak on church growth based on the Acts 2 church. He did a great job of exegeting the text, outlining all the elements that made the church go in its early days, elements like fellowship, worship, and study. It was when he got to the application that the lesson took a turn. He shared how his church had applied all of these elements. They fellowshipped, so we started a regular potluck program. They studied the apostles' teaching, so we've invested heavily in having a good Bible class program. They were generous with their possessions, so we have a benevolence program, and so on. When I read Acts 2, I don't see an organization putting on programs that people can participate in. I see a family of Spirit-filled people doing all of these things naturally because it's what Jesus-following people do, not because the apostles scheduled it into their lives. This is one where it is the idea of equipping, is you can do this for people or you can teach them to do it. And you teach them to do it by example, because sometimes if the church fellowship thing is that they're putting on potlucks, maybe the elders aren't all that hospitable themselves because, hey, we already eat together, we've got this thing going on. No, you have to model it and teach people to do it in your own way, and that doesn't make the potluck a bad thing to do. Fellowship meal, if if we want to be too technical about that, whatever it may be, getting together to eat, with the whole group, but doing this organically, training other people to do it organically, is a whole different animal than this kind of box checking. Much like the point about paid ministry staff, the point here is not to paint programs as sinful or anti-biblical. The point is to get us asking the questions. How would a business operate? How would a family operate? And which one do we most resemble? Most important, of course, is to ask ourselves which model most closely aligns with the Bible. Does trying to determine what people want and offering it to them in hopes that they'll feel prioritized align with dying to self and following Jesus at all costs? Though there certainly are preachers, elders, and teachers in the Bible, was there ever a sense of being a we putting on a church for you? Again, kinda. kind of. That we, they have to defend the church. They have to do the teaching and preaching, and to whatever degree that Paul looked at himself and Timothy and Titus and the elders they would appoint as a we, that's valid, but they should be not viewing that as a consumer provider thing, but as an equipped thing, as we've just discussed there. And so again, that doesn't make programs wrong. I'm less hard on them as maybe I was a few years ago, but I do think there's so many times just a bandage for not, or a Band-Aid solution to fixing things that might take a little more work, take a little more focus, a little more time investment, I guess, of getting to where we need people to be, of discipling people and bringing people along, and hospitality and fellowship and visitation and all those kinds of things. In our busy world, it's very easy to just kind of make it, okay, well, you show up this time and we'll say that we did that. It's much more of a spirit of doing these things, where sometimes you're going to be doing a lot of it, sometimes not as much, but you've got the attitude to look for the opportunities to do those things, rather than checking a box. And so we're going to stop right there for this one. We'll get to the second half of this, where it kind of the chapter like folds back in on itself, and we take all those ideas and show where they come out this way, what a consumeristic church does versus what a family-like church does. But maybe some of this resonated with you. I hope it did, of what business-like Christianity looks like, and so much coming from the preacher, so much coming from the church organization itself, and less of a sense of we, which is what we have to cultivate if we're really going to equip and be this strong family going to do the work together. And so that's all I got for this week. I've got articles that kind of are aligning with some of this. I'm going to reshare an article I did, when this comes out, that will already have released. So go check that out at jackwilkie.co. Called Evangelism Isn't Everything, because again, this number-like focus gets us in this rut, and I think if we focus on our own internal health first, that's evangelism flows better from that. And so there's a lot of other ways to take this, but we'll finish right there. As I said, if you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe to Focus Press. If you're listening on the podcast app, or if you haven't subscribed to the podcast app, even if you're not listening to this on the podcast app, that's my one request from you, is subscribe to the Church Reset podcast, or whichever podcast app you like to use. And if you already do, please be sure to leave a review. But thank you guys for tuning in. Lord willing, I'll be back next week with the second half of Chapter 2 in this Church Reset read-through.